My name is Michael Joy and I live in this beautiful parish of Portroe in County Tipperary. It's a small parish, just over 10 square miles in area, and it is situated at the southern end of Lochberg on the River Shannon. The people of Portroe are proud of their parish, proud of its history, its antiquities and the artefacts of a distant past which chronicle both in stone and in earth the culture and the civilization of this area of North Tipperary. The parish of Castletown Arra is known today as the parish of Portroe. The official name is Castletown Arra, called after the townland of Castletown, which is the site of the first Christian settlement in the area and which is in the barony of Arra, hence Castletown Arra. It has well been described as where the Arra mountains stand and admiring the beauties of Lochberg. Unlike most parishes, Castletown Arra is not an amalgam of several civil parishes. The Catholic parish today is coterminous with the civil parish, and its boundaries are described in the Civil Survey of 1654. From this map of the area, you can see that the parish is bordered on the north and west by the River Shannon, and on the other two sides by the Arra Mountains. I would like you to come with me now. I hope you will enjoy seeing some parts of the hidden island, places not even listed in holiday brochures, but to us they are places of beauty, places of charm, and particularly places of peace. As we journey from the parish boundary on the hilltops to the shores of Lochberg, we will see megalithic tombs and legons, ring forts and coils, ancient castles, and some of the great houses of the 18th century. We will also see the many slate quarries which are synonymous with the parish and which have contributed much to the lifestyle, to the vitality and to the history of Castletown for many hundreds of years. High up in the hills of Lachamore, there is one of the oldest burial sites in the area, a wedge tomb, which dates back to the Neolithic age, about 1500 to 2000 BC. This wedge tomb was not just a single grave, it was a communal grave, a type of ancient cemetery, and it would have been used as the burial place for the leader of the community at the time and for members of his family. In Lisheen, there are examples of legons or standing stones, which date from the early Bronze Age. They date from about 2000 BC to 500 AD, and they also marked a burial site, and they were usually built in a circle. The oldest known centres of habitation still extant in the parish are the ring forts. There are many still surviving. This one in Lisheen, now overgrown, would have been the home of a farmer, and these ring forts date from about 300 AD to about 1000 AD. From this ancient ring fort, there was a complete view of the valley in front, which gave the inhabitants of the fort the advantage of seeing any possible enemy in the distance. Here at the base of Towntinner, which is the highest point in the parish, over 1,500 feet above sea level, is another megalithic tomb dating back to the Bronze Age. It is known today as the Graves of the Leinstermen. This ancient burial site has associations with Brian Boru, most famous king of Ireland, who fell to a Viking sword at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. His fortress was at Kincora, a few miles downriver from where we are. And this is how it looked 1,000 years ago. This site, the Graves of the Leinstermen, is also the site of a battle between King Brian and his brother-in-law, the King of Leinster. Brian was victorious in this battle, and as the King of Leinster lay dying here, he asked to be buried within sight of his own kingdom of Leinster. His wish was granted, and he was carried across the top of the mountain to Knock-on-Reline, from where the kingdom of Leinster can be seen across the plains of Ormond. One of the oldest monastic sites in the area is Portroe, an island at the southern end of Lough Derg. The first monastery on this island was founded in the year 520 by the monks from Terryglass Abbey, which was another monastic settlement about 20 miles further up the lake. In the Middle Ages, this monastic site consisted of a cathedral, 8 churches and 2 round towers. Today, we can only marvel at its timeless heritage. The monks from this island extended their evangelization to the neighbouring areas. And so, Castletown, which is the nearest part of the parish to the island, was the site of the earliest place of Christian worship in this area. Today, there are the ruins of an old church and a graveyard situated beside the lake. The church ruins here are comparatively modern, and certainly not earlier than the 15th century. One of the distinctive features of the graveyard surrounding the church is the large number of slate headstones, some dating back many centuries. Some of them show rather primitive engravings of Christian symbols. Close to the church here, only about 200 metres away, was the seat of the old Irish family of the O'Briens, chieftains of Arra. In 1569, Turlough O'Brien of Arra made his submission to Queen Elizabeth of England. He surrendered his estates and in return received royal favours and privileges. His son Portroe had been taken as a young boy to Oxford to be educated. Whilst there, he apostatized. His father petitioned Queen Elizabeth to have him appointed first Protestant Bishop of Killaloe. His request was granted, and Portroe O'Brien lived here in the manor of Castletown for 40 years as Protestant Bishop of the diocese and chieftain of the O'Brien clan. During his reign, his parents Turlough and Mara died, and their mortal remains are interred here in this old tomb. After his installation as bishop, the church here in Castletown was taken over by the Protestant community and was used by them as a place of worship until 1855, when a new church was built at Castletown Cross. In 1923, due to declining population, the rector was transferred. And again, due to a further decline, this Church of Ireland was closed as a place of worship in the 1950s. After the Cromwellian era, it is difficult to trace the history of the Catholic Church in the area during the penal times. Dating back to the penal times, there is this mass rock in the townland of Ballycarrido. It has a crude engraving of a cross and a hollowed-out waterfront known as a bull-on. The oral tradition is that this rock was used as an altar during the penal period. Here you can see some of the famine ridges. These ridges bear witness to the tragic period in the 19th century, when due to the failure of the potato crop, starvation reduced the population of the parish from well over 4,000 people to under 3,000. In just 2 years, almost 1/3 of the parishioners died. The potatoes were sown, but never dug. As the penal laws were relaxed, a Mr. Watson, who was the Protestant landlord in Kennedy, gifted a site for a church. This site is in the village of Portroe, and it was originally a ring fort. The first church was just a rectangular cabin built with mud and wattles. It had a thatched roof and an earthen floor, no seats, and it would have looked something like this, which is a model of an old penal church. Due to the primitive materials available at the time, it had a relatively short lifespan, and it was replaced in the early 1800s by another church, which was T-shaped. This present church, which is on the same site as the two earlier ones, was built in 1872, and the first Mass was said in it on Christmas Day, 1872. A stained glass window in honour of our national apostle, St. Patrick, is dedicated to Watson, who presented the site for the first church. In the sanctuary, there are two windows from the Harry Clark Studios. These were donated by Father William Farrell, a native of the parish who spent most of his life as a priest in Australia. This was the first presbytery, built in 1880, and it was lived in by the parish priest until it was sold in 1964. It has changed hands several times since. The present presbytery was built in 1965, a much more modest house, but what has been lost in architectural splendour has been more than compensated for by the view from the living room window. The remnants of 4 medieval castles or tower houses can still be seen in the parish. The bits of masonry which are left are just fragments of their former size and strength. 500 years of weathering the elements has taken its toll. Kennedy Castle, a medieval stronghold of the O'Kennedys, was built about 1480 and extended to the north from the present ruin. but it was destroyed, like all castles in the area, by the Cromwellian army under Henry Ireton in the autumn of 1650. The stones from the castle were later used to build the harbour walls. And there is a tradition that the High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, was born here. Garrykennedy was once a thriving port on the Shannon and was used for the export of slate and agricultural produce, as well as for the import of coal, turf, spirits and Guinness. The village letterbox, once red, is now green and recorded the transition from Eduardus Rex of England to Sérstát Éireann, the Irish Free State, in 1922. We leave Garrykennedy now, but we'll be back, because everybody who finds Garrykennedy returns. And as we follow the flow of the Shannon, we come to Castlelock Castle, an old castle of the O'Briens, now just a picturesque ruin situated on a small island in Castlelock Bay. Some stone steps leading into what was the east wall can still be seen in the ruins. Still following the flow of the Shannon, we come to Castletown with its tower house, which gives its name to the townland. This building has had a checkered history. It was in turn the stronghold of the O'Briens of Arra, and was also the residence of Murtagh O'Brien, the first Protestant Bishop of Killaloe. The brickwork and fireplaces are from a much later date. Oliver Cromwell only spent 9 months in Ireland, but during that time he generated great fear. After heavy losses in Clonmel, Cromwell returned to England, and he left his charges here in Ireland in the hands of his son-in-law, Henry Ireton. In late October 1650, Ireton left Nina on his way to Killaloe. He plundered the churches and castles of Drummondere and Monsay, continued on to Castletown, where he overnighted here on November Eve 1650. Castletown was different from the other parishes in that there was no Catholic church here to plunder, the church having been taken over by the Protestants 80 years earlier on the submission of Turlough O'Brien to Queen Elizabeth. All the O'Brien lands were confiscated and were all settled on Cromwellian settlers. This gaunt remnant is all that remains of what was once a 4-storey tower house known as Tomlock Castle. It was built by the Rolleston family after they had acquired the townlands of Ballingear and Tomlock in the Cromwellian confiscations. Of the 10 original Cromwellian beneficiaries in the parish, the Rollestons survived the longest, being eventually sold out in the landed estates courts in the 1850s. Gary Kennedy House was built in the second half of the 19th century. It replaced the old manor house, which was built by the Cromwellan plantee Henry Felton, after he had acquired the lands of Gary Kennedy in the 1650s. It was designed by a French architect and over the years has passed through many hands. The tower on the lands of Gary Kennedy House was built by a Mr. W.R. Collett, who was at that time MP for Lincoln in Westminster. He was also manager of the local State Quarries Company. However, for some reason, he got into bad favour with the locals, and the Terrials, which was a terrorist organisation at the time, dug a grave in the woods in Gary Kennedy and put a notice on it stating it was a grave for Mr. Collett. Collett panicked when he saw what was happening and decided to build a tower for protection. It was never completed or roofed because apparently the animosity towards him subsided. Today, the lands around the house are a wild bird conservancy.
We're here at Castletown, which was a property originally, we believe, and suppose owned by the O'Briens. It was bought by Mrs. Cole, and the back portion of the house, which is Jacobean, was built in 1712. Subsequently, I believe it was bought by the Parker family, and in about 1860-70, the front portion of the house was added by the Parkers. And in about the middle of the last century, the Parker family laid out the formal gardens as they are now. At the time the garden was laid out, there was quite a strong interest in exotic plants, mainly I think because William and Joseph Hooker, who were the curators of Kew, brought back many rhododendrons and azaleas from the Himalayas, and many of that type of plant was planted here, and of course because of the very acid soil they thrived and grew to tremendous size. A feature of the older part of the house, built in 1712, are the three original Jacobean windows. There's one very large one over the stairs, which is supposed to be quite unusual, and a smaller one under that, as you can see, and one to the right. And then in the basement, the sliding windows are also a feature that you don't find in very many old houses. This long cottage in the yard dates from the same time as the original back portion of the house in 1712.
Castletown House is the former glebe house, built in 1820 and was the residence of the Church of Ireland rector.
This now deconsecrated Church of Ireland was designed by Joseph Welland in 1863. He was a prominent architect of the mid-19th century and had quite a large ecclesiastical practice. The original site for the church was to be in Castletown, but due to foundation difficulties they decided to change the position to this site in Castletown, which was donated by the Parker family. It is a reasonably typical Gothic Revival church, small rural church, although it has quite an unusual tower, the normal arrangement being a west square tower. We have a tower on the south facade with quite complex geometry. The tower and the window surrounds are in sandstone. We bought the church in 1985. And at that time it was in quite good structural condition. Although it was only in sporadic use for a number of years previously. We commenced work in the autumn of '85. We put in two new suspended timber floors, the first of them about 2 feet below the eaves, and the other at the bottom of the lancet window. Also, looking at the site topography, it appeared to me that we would perhaps be able to dig out the basement, as the foundations were likely to go down to quite a low level. That proved correct, so that gave us a third level. The upper space we chose to make the living room. One of the reasons for that was that it allowed us to gain quite an amount of light through roof lighting, without changing the facade to any great degree. Another reason was that it gave us an outlook above graveyard level, which is a little less somber perhaps. The upper space, the living room space, is quite large. It measures 50 feet by 21 feet and has a height of 18 feet, the apex of the ceiling. It has a window donated by the Parker family in memory of a daughter of theirs, Anna Christina, in the 1870s.
The pink wash of Loch Day House makes a distinctive landmark for lake traffic. This neat Georgian house was built originally for the manager of the slate quarries. Now the gardens around Loughdale House are truly places of peace and tranquility. This house was derelict, but has now been restored with a very fine thatched roof. When viewed from the front, it appears to be a single-storey house, but with clever architectural expertise, when seen from the back, it is a two-storey house. Farming plays a big part in the economy of the parish. Because of the many contrasting types of soil, the district has always lent itself to mixed farming, tillage, livestock and dairying. Following the nationwide trend, the number of full-time farmers is dropping steadily, and many of the smaller farms are worked on a part-time basis. Today, grassland farming has taken over and tillage is almost gone. The milk produced goes to the local co-op creamery in Nina. But since joining the EU and with Brussels placing quotas on milk production, sheep and dry stock have become popular because the labour input is much less and the herds can be managed reasonably well with smaller labour resources.
Tubex company's here since the mid-30s, and in 1978, with the help of the IDA, it was bought by the Group family of Tubex Germany. Same name, but no connection. Following the takeover, it was then equipped with new equipment, and we tried to change the focus of the business, which in the beginning was primarily export business, not very reliable. So we then started to go for the home market with our new equipment. The number of people employed at that time was about 38, and we now have 122. And we've changed a lot in those years. As part of the Tubex group, the Irish operation has responsibility for most of the English-speaking markets. It also, in the last 3 years, has acquired a tube company in Denmark for which it has responsibility. And the markets are generally serviced through the Irish company, which is something new in terms of an international group, that most of the international sales come through the Irish operation. Our markets nowadays are predominantly the Irish market because of the IDA policy. We service people like Loctite and Procter & Gamble, etc. But in the export markets, we also service the United States market, the UK market, where we make tubes for Coleman's mustard, and the German market. We manufacture a range of tubes from 13.5 millimeter diameter, for example, the Loctite tube, of which we manufacture about 40 million a year, to 35 millimeter, which is toothpaste tubes that we export. And the demands made on us nowadays by our customers is a very high standard, greater flexibility. We have, for example, the ISO 9000, which is a standard that's required for dealing with most of our major customers. The process itself is on 85 per minute lines, which is high-speed equipment, and the number of checks that have to be made are quite substantial. But this is the world we live in nowadays, where we have to service the customer what he wants. The location of the factory is quite unusual, and whilst a lot of our major customers have commented on this, it's such an unusual location, it hasn't in any way detracted from us doing business here. So the factory has been part of the life of Portroe for many years, and we certainly hope, with the cooperation of the people, that it will be for many years to come.
The parish can lay claim to one record, that of being the location of the biggest and best slate quarries in the country. Slate has been quarried here for centuries, and over the years has proved to have been an invaluable asset to the local economy. In the middle 1800s, 700 men were employed here in work which was very dangerous. The slate produced here is of exceptional quality because of its very low absorbance of water. Slate from these quarries were used to slate the GPO, the forecourts and Kilmainham jail. Frolics or slate stone bridges were built to carry rails for the transport of spoil. The quarries closed in the mid-1950s when natural slate had to give way to the cheaper roofing of tile and asbestos. A small operation in the line of dressing existing slate is still in operation, and there is a strong demand for this natural material.
The stone comes in after quarry all jaggedy. It is cut by saw into shape and then given to the splitter to split into slates. When the slate comes from the splitter, it still has the straight edge on it. It has to be dressed on a dressing machine. The finished slate has a dressed edge all around. The clone slate is a blue-grey slate in comparison with the blue bangle, which is a well slate, Spanish slate, or an American green slate.
The offcuts of slate stone are still used in the construction of decorative entrances. After the introduction of the national school system in the 1830s, a new school was built in Portroe. It was on the site of this house, now occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Rody Boland. This school was replaced in 1876 by what is now known as the Old School. There was also a school in Castletown which catered for the Protestant community. At the other side of the parish, in the quarries area, there was a school in Corbally, and it was replaced by this school in Killorn in 1932. Both the school in Killorn and the school in the village were amalgamated, and a new school was built in Portroe in 1971. Apart from the formal education of the pupils, a strong emphasis is placed on their participation in both traditional music and the national games, particularly hurling, a factor which helps greatly in ensuring a supply of new blood to the hurling club. The club's ambitions were finally realised in 1990 with the winning of the county intermediate hurling title. We return, as we promised, to Garrykennedy, where music and friendliness are your constant companions. Among the well-known local musicians, who unfortunately are no longer with us, are the fiddle maker Jerry Martin and the internationally known accordion player and composer Paddy O'Brien, who lies at rest here in Garrykennedy graveyard. His headstone is a reminder of his identification with the instrument of his love, the two-row button accordion. Garrykennedy is a haven for traditional music lovers. It's a place where you can experience the strong bonds which unite music lovers everywhere. And before you can say crack agus ceol, which in English means good fun and great music, the musicians are there to rouse the spirits. Because in the culture of Garrykennedy, music is the language of life and celebration. Some of the local musicians have guested on several occasions with the internationally known Scottish Fiddle Orchestra.
The Gary Kennedy Heritage Players.
The group plays two selections of traditional Irish music, the second being Irish reels, but the first piece is taken from the works of the unique Irish harper Portroe, who was born in 1670 and died in 1738, and this demonstrates the strong influence of Carolan on the classical music of that period.
That, in essence, is the story of Castletown Arra, an Irish country parish rich in its heritage and unsurpassed in its scenery. And if this presentation helps to give its people a sense of pride in their own place, it will have been all well worthwhile. The end of the day reveals one of those magical summer skies, while evening is closed with a selection of sunsets which could only be painted by the hand of God.